you use?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Data Connectivity and Machine Learning for Global Logistics and Supply Chain. How to adopt innovative solutions for efficient demand forecasting and planning. This is a live webinar co-hosted by Yoedi and Transmetrics. My name is Geshe Laksala. I'm Head of Business Development at Yoedi, working with our customers, our partners, and our products, and I'm a data connectivity enthusiast. Prior to joining Yoedi 3 years ago, I've already worked 10 years in the logtech industry with delivery management, TMS systems, and integrations. And before that, in the logistics industry itself. And throughout the years, I've realized the importance of demand forecasting. And that's why I'm especially excited to have here as the co-host with me, a true subject matter expert. Welcome, Dimitar.
Thank you, Geshe. I think I share a very similar experience like yourself, originally coming from the logistics industry. I've been passionate about demand forecasting since my early days at one of the largest freight forwarders in Europe. Currently we're helping implement these high-tech solutions into the operations of global logistics companies.
Thanks. Welcome on virtual stage. Go on with the agenda for the webinar. Our agenda today and the key learnings of the webinar are basically fourfold. How AI and big data analytics can help logistics service providers improve the efficiency of demand forecasting and planning, and why the AI-based resource planning solutions can be a competitive advantage. Then we are also going to address the challenges faced by freight forwarders in demand forecasting and planning and discuss some solutions to overcome these. And last but not least, we are going to address how Transmetrics and Yoedi can be a trusted technology partners in this space. We have booked 30 minutes for today's webinar, and throughout the presentation, you're very welcome to share any questions you might have in the Q&A section of the webinar tool, and we will then make sure to address your questions at the end of the webinar. So let's get right into the topic.
If we start with introducing who we are and what we do, in a nutshell, Transmetrics is a high-tech company that helps implement some of the latest technologies like AI, big data analytics, predictive analytics for more optimal decision making, for better visibility on both operational but also cost efficiency, and also helping on the asset heavy side of the industry to be more efficient when it comes to asset management. So all these technologies are incrementally adding to the value to our customers, their leads, and by customers, think about the DHLs of the world, Kuehne+Nagel's, DPD, Schenker, really some of the largest guys out there. Of course, we also work with some local heroes here and there in the different geographies across the world. But in general, our solutions lead to much better demand visibility. We're talking about forecasting accuracy levels of exceeding 95%. In terms of cost optimization, we lead to significant improvements in the network, but also the transportation costs. When it comes to asset management, we are improving with double digits the utilization and the turn times of the assets deployed, and therefore you can do the same amount of business with a much smaller fleet, or vice seen in another way, you can do more business with your existing fleet. And back to you, Geshe.
Thanks, Dimitar. So Yoedi is about a fully managed service for global trade, logistics, and supply chain data connectivity. And if we are looking into what that means in practice, we are connecting the dots of the global supply chain. That's our motto. But how are we doing this for real? So it's a lot about the ecosystem around Yoedi, our ecosystem of our customers, and our partners. And our customers, if they are a shipper or a receiver, in the logistics chain. They can be from any industry, wholesale, retail, industrial, but many of them are logistics service providers. So for instance, carriers or freight forwarders, but even the systems, the platforms, the software that these players are using can be our customer. And then very importantly is the logistics service provider ecosystem. We have basically connected all the leading players and also regional heroes of any mode of transport of global logistics. And very importantly as well, the systems that these players in the global supply chain are using, from ERP to TMS, transportation management systems, FMS, visibility providers, and then specialized providers such as our partner Transmetrics. And through these partnerships, we are able to offer both out-of-the-box connectivity with the leading players and their systems for all modes of transports, but also then always with the possibility to have your own bespoke integration use case been added. And we are very active and nimble in providing new trading partner to onboarding new stakeholders to the platform. We are automating the entire logistics cycle. So all the messages, all the processes in the logistics scene are then relevant for us. So from schedules to bookings, shipping instructions, related transport documents, obviously track and trace, and then even the administrative message types such as freight invoices. Despite our name, we don't work only with EDI, we work with API and everything in between. So our iPaaS, our solution is adapted to designed to adapt to any type of message type, communication method, and data format.
And talking about data, I think this is the most important ingredient over there. If we move to the next slide, you will see that the transportation and logistics industry generates huge amounts of data with the introduction of IoT tracking devices, RFID devices. More and more companies from the mid to small size are introducing TMS systems. Some of them that have been growing inorganically, they have multiple of those. And that creates a lot of data, but this data is very lowly utilized. Just a handful of the companies globally are using AI in their daily operations, and that's likely to significantly grow over the next several years based on Boston Consulting Group research. And the question is, do we want to build a competitive advantage today, or as a logistics service provider want to wait and see what happens and be forced to adopt this technology in a couple of years down the line, and obviously from a much worse starting position. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see where the problematics lie. One of them is in the different data sources that are being generated by these multiple systems. We mentioned about some companies working in multiple TMS and ERP systems environment. We talked about RFID technologies, IoT technologies, telematics. Planning is primarily used is done in Excel. There is obviously different geographies with different legislative constraints that need to be taken into account. And also a big chunk of the data is still manually produced, which leads to some data quality limitations. So when we combine all these kind of different formats, different structure of the data, the manual creation of this data, this may result, when you combine it all, in a lack of operational visibility. So if we go to the next slide, this is one of actually the hurdles. Another hurdle is obviously the data availability and operating in silos. The data quality needs to be taken into consideration and tackled because it's a garbage in, garbage out scenario. When it comes to demand forecasting, and not only about freight forwarders, but for the general logistics service providers world, many of these companies over-rely on customer forecasts that are known to be notoriously bad. However, sometimes it's the best they can work with. More and more companies are nowadays trying to work on in-house demand forecasting solutions. However, they mostly do it in Excel. and also they do not necessarily provide the right environment for data scientists to thrive, and some of them don't have them even. This is a major limitation. Another very important limitation is the change management. Obviously, this is a relatively new thing for the transportation and logistics sector, and there must be a buy-in from the operational teams, which is not always the case, and it takes quite a lot of time to change the mentality within the organization. However, we can exhibit on the next slide what the traditional capacity planning, resource and capacity planning looks, as opposed to what it might be. So if you look at the left-hand side, there is a curve, the yellowish curve, which kind of exhibits the fluctuating demand. However, and of course, sometimes the demand is over the supply, but regardless of whether you're under supplied or oversupplied, you either ship air or you're unable to meet your service levels. The idea here is that AI can significantly improve your ability to align both supply and demand by forecasting the one so that you can adjust the other. And don't get me wrong, it's impossible to be 100% efficient because there's no demand forecast that is 100% accurate. However, there is a lot of room for improvement there, and even if you optimize or improve your P&L with a couple of percentage points, that can lead to significant savings. But here comes the question: how actually these demand forecasts are built? What are they based on? And if we go to the next slide, we can see that there are two important components for the demand forecast. Of course, very naturally, the first one is the historical data of the logistics service providers. Things like shipments, bookings are used to see the trends in seasonality when it comes to the historical patterns of the volumes. Of course, there is more in terms of big customer modeling or events modeling that can play a role here. However, what traditionally plays a big role is to combine this internal or historical data with a set of external factors. When you think about public holidays, to give an example about Black Friday on the e-commerce volumes, to give another example of Chinese New Year on shipping volumes. There is plenty of example, Easter in the Christian world. Of course, consumer sentiment or this commercial forecast can be also implemented as an external factor. We touched upon this. They are notoriously bad in terms of their accuracy. However, they still hide some signals that can be extracted. Think about economic indicators, about Forex, about PMI indexes, about industrial seasonality, depending on the commodities that a particular service provider is dealing with. And of course, giving the possibility to the planners, to the team, to adjust based on the information they receive by email, by the phone. Something that is not yet recorded as data can be still incorporated by the planners by manually adjusting this forecast. And when you combine all these activities, at the end of the day, you end up with a much better, much more accurate demand forecasts that are kind of better aligning supply and demand, and allowing to have much more optimal logistics plans for the foreseeable future. But of course, in order to get there, you need the data behind. And I'll pass the ball back to Geshe to give some best examples about that.
Thanks, Dimitar. Yes, so indeed, data quality, but also just data availability is the prerequisite for having good demand forecasting. And how are we then at Yoedi making this possible? So as mentioned, this is a fully managed data connectivity solution. And in the center of the solution is the Yoedi iPaaS. iPaaS stands for Integration Platform as a Service, and basically means a cloud integration tool to orchestrate all of your data connectivity needs. We have been developing this iPaaS in-house over the course of the last 10 years, based on really efficient, scalable, and secure Microsoft Azure technology. And we are continuously developing this service. A part of developing the iPaaS is that it needs to work with and on all the most common standards of messaging in global logistics. EDIFACT is still a very common message in global logistics, but there's also other versions of it. There's, for instance, the NCX12 in the US. Then there's a slightly more modern XML technology, and nowadays APIs are taking over with, for instance, JSON REST-based technology. Then there is, to make the topic even more complex, there is sub-segment specific messaging standards. For example, there's the traditional cargo imp, the more modern cargo XML, or now even cargo JSON formats of the air freight industry by the IATA. Then there's the EANCOM standard in retail logistics. And for instance, especially recently in ocean logistics, the Digital Container Shipping Association, the DCSA, has set out to introduce API-based standards for messaging in one of the most traditional logistics industries. And for us and our customers, obviously, it's very important that the solution works with all of these technologies and messaging standards. As Dimitar has also pointed out, for demand forecasting, you need both historical data, but then also the operational data from various different sources and processes. And that's why our tool is completely agnostic to the message type or the process type that the message you want to exchange, the data you want to exchange. And in practice, that means we are handling, for instance, sailing schedules, delivery schedules, tenders, bookings, confirmations, obviously transport orders, and all the documents that are still in a binary format attached to these messages, like, for instance, customs documents, shipping documents. All of these documents are currently being digitized, but there's still a lot of information that also needs to be extracted from kind of offline systems and data. Track and trace has been mentioned. Telematics data, so real-time information, is extremely important. And but also administrative data, like, for instance, a freight invoice is typically addressed by our tool. As briefly introduced in the beginning, the outstanding part of this service is really the combination of the off-the-shelf connections to the leading systems in this space, ready-made connectivity combined with the flexibility to have our skilled expertise, professional services add then your own bespoke integration case. Like, for instance, have your own regional logistics service providers or your own home-built system then mapped to the message exchange tool. Bridging the walls of API and EDI, the kind of traditional legacy file-based connections and the more modern real-time cloud integrations over API is a very common topic for us, and is really important in these times of digitalization of the supply chain. Dimitar, back to you.
Yeah, if we move to the next slide, I think we can elaborate on how the future collaboration and the value proposition can be enriched by combining forces. Of course, in the beginning is the underlying data, the historical data that needs to be taken into account as a main input for any demand forecasting project. But when we even step back from the demand forecasting kind of special niche, once the data is there, we can build AI and big data analytics solutions on top, be it for business intelligence purposes or for other such. Demand forecasting is something that we mentioned a lot in this webinar, but beyond that, we can also build tailored automations in terms of planning, network flows, planning, asset management, repositioning, planning, line haul planning, if you wish, or other examples like that. Of course, planning and automating it always comes to the point of how more efficient the automated one is versus the traditional resource and capacity planning. So in that regard, there must be an optimization character there. be it optimizing empty mileage, be it optimizing empty moves, optimizing total cost, or kind of a balancing between cost and service levels is also something that the technology can allow. And something that is very important, especially post-corona, is building resilient networks, building resilient supply chains. And that comes with building digital twins so that you're able to experiment with different network characteristics, with different network parameters, and seeing what the impact of your solutions would be should something unexpected happen on your network, should something that you plan with but don't know what the effect of will be on your network. So basically all these changes can be simulated through these digital twins, and they can show what is the effect of certain planning decisions on the overall network efficiency.
UEDI works a lot with specialized solutions like Transmetrics that are really focusing on solving a specific use case, a specific pain in the industry, and doing this in the most efficient way. Many of these platforms are focusing on developing the core, and then basically the way how you communicate with it is a standardized API. So you look into how can the customer access the solution the most efficient way from any type of system. And that means that you need to introduce a harmonized interface that you can use to feed the data into the algorithms. And we have been looking at what would be then the systems that would feed the data into these APIs. In this context, TMS, transportation management systems, ERPs. We also heard that a lot of the planning is still happening in Excel or other sources. And very often each of these systems has its own integration interfaces. Some of them might be on-prem, meaning that they have offline traditional legacy types of accessing or extracting the data from these systems. More and more of the ERPs, the TMSs are going to the cloud, which also then means that you have APIs. But even an API to API communication requires a middle layer that does the translation work, that really connects one API to the other. And that is exactly how you can, by using these two types of solutions, have all your data that previously has been siloed communicate with a modern and efficient solution like the one from Transmetrics. Yeah, so we are slowly approaching the end of our webinar. And unless, Dimitar, you would like to add anything here, I think we could go over to our Q&A section and see whether we've already received some questions from our audience.
Yeah, happy to go into that phase.
Great. So we actually have a few questions already shared by participants. Where do you store gathered data? In a data lake house is one of the questions. I think we can, Dimitar, maybe address it from both sides. Would you like to give it a shot? Yeah. Did you hear the question, or should I reread it?
Yeah, well, whether the data should be stored in data lakes or elsewhere. If you want, you can start because you're the data specialist, but I also have a good opinion on that, and I can add to that.
Yes, so definitely. A lot of the solutions that we are connecting at UEDI, the different systems, the TMSs or specialized like solutions like Transmetrics, they come with their own databases, but basically the data is then used for that particular process that you are handling in that particular system. And very often it is a limited amount of time that you store the data there. Most of our customers and our partners who are large players in the industry, they have the need to have data lakes that are pulling data from various different sources, so that are basically neutralized and are feeding then data into the different applications. So a data integration tool like UEDI also comes with basically data storage, but it is used only for the data processing that you need to get data from A to B. So typically the customers also want to have a separate storage for reporting, for instance, for the BI purposes.
Yeah, and I would support that. I think especially if companies are working in multi-system environment, which is very often the case, that requires having a data lake that you can step on and then build various solutions such as business intelligence, reporting, or other more advanced solutions on top.
Right, so this was a really good question. Then the next one, are there any limits to the number of systems that can be connected to the iPaaS? And what happens if I change my system once I'm connected to the iPaaS? Yeah, that's a very good question as well. So there's no limit whatsoever, and that's actually the key benefit of the iPaaS, that it can connect to any type of system and to any number of systems. Also, the question of change is actually a key one here, because one of the main reasons to have a middle layer, to have an efficient iPaaS-based, for instance, data connectivity middle layer, is that it gives you the flexibility. So, of course, a lot of the TMSs, the ERPs also come with some kind of integration capabilities, but then you're basically bound with that system. And also, one system provider typically cannot be an expert on the other system provider. So you want to have a neutral layer in between. In the times where you are not sure, will you remain with your current ERP? How long does your on-prem TMS serve your purpose, etc.? So a lot of our customers are actually looking for a solution like ours in times of migration from one system to the other. Okay, let's see whether we have some more questions here. Scrolling up to the earlier one. Dimitar, can you also see the Q&A section?
No, I'm not having visibility on that.
Okay, having some technical issues seeing that. Here it is. So, what technical requirements should companies consider when implementing these innovative demand forecasting solutions like Transmetrics? So it's about technical requirements.
Yeah, I guess what they need to ensure is that there is kind of a change management happening within the organization, because their organization still kind of manage the old-fashioned way. So they need to invest in at least project management capabilities, guys that can kind of know the organization inside out and know what kind of tools to have in order to influence decision making, but also adoption. That's very important. Of course, we're talking about logistics service providers, so we know they are not IT companies. So we are trying to support them as much as possible to in-source all the technical capabilities so that they can really focus on the adoption itself, testing and validation. What I would suggest is to go away from on-prem solutions. I think the future is in the cloud. So they better consider a cloud solution that can be remotely supported, remotely upgraded, and that does not require any internal additional support that an on-prem solution would require.
Great, great answer, thanks. And then last question here, a good one. You mentioned data quality as an issue several times in the presentation. Can you give an example of what issues you mean and how to overcome them? Yeah, data quality, I think a very concrete example from real life. We talked a lot about that track and trace, telematics data, for instance, is an important data source, but track and trace often requires a location, right? You want to know where your goods are and where they are. But the question of where is actually not as easy as it sounds, because many systems that don't actually have a standard for location. In different modes of transport, you do use different standards. For instance, in ocean, there's a low code. In air, you might use the 3-letter airport codes. But especially in multimodal logistics, it's difficult because you might have free text fields describing a place, a city, etc. So how we are solving it at Yoedi is that we are introducing mapping tables where we design jointly with the customer a common standard, and then we translate all the non-standard location data to to that standard location. So that's one concrete example. Dimitar, would you like to add another one?
Sure, yeah. In the logistics sector, there's a lot of issues with data quality. One good example is having duplicate records for a repeating event and trying to figure out which is the last one that you can trust. Another one could be having outliers in the data. So think about adding extra zero here and there, which makes your shipments weight from 10 kilos to 10,000 kilos, which is obviously a problem. Another one would be having missing data. If we talk about ocean shipping, but also road transportation, that these are mostly events or scan-based businesses. There is lots of missing scans or events that kind of hinder you to recreate the whole shipment or container life cycle, and therefore build good quality reporting on top of your scans and events data. So there is lots of these things that we see in our everyday life. But fortunately, we found a way to improve this and to overcome these hurdles in order to ensure that the outputs of our activities at the end of the day are reliable and are useful for everyday operations.
Perfect. Thank you, Dimitar. Now we are reaching the end of our webinar. And obviously there are quite a few good questions, but definitely if there's any more questions, we would like to welcome you to reach out to either of us by any mode of contact, and we can schedule a one-to-one session to address any further questions. So at this stage, we'd like to thank you very much. We will record this, have recorded this webinar, and we'll be then sharing it with you afterwards. Have a great day.